Beating the bat's wing. Then he heard a light tread on the bunkhouse stair. He sat up in time to see Carmen come up into the room. She had one hand pressed flat on her chest like she was out of breath, or panicking, or both.
Sloop talked to Bobby, she said, for ages.
Did he hit you? Reacher asked. Her hand went up to her cheek.
No,
she said. Did he? She looked away.
Oh, just once,
she said.
Not hard.
I should go break his arms.
He called the sheriff.
Who did?
Sloop.
When?
Just now. He talked to Bobby and then he called.
About me? She nodded.
He wants you out of here.
It's okay, Reacher said. The sheriff won't do anything.
You think?
Reacher nodded. I squared him away before. She paused a beat.
I've got to get back now. He thinks I'm with Ellen.
You want me to come with you?
Not yet. Let me talk to him first.
Don't let him hit you again, Carmen. Come get me as soon as you need me. Or make noise, okay? Scream and shout. She started back down the stairs.
I will,
she said.
I promise. You sure about the sheriff?
Don't worry, he said. The sheriff won't do a thing. Echo Burning by Lee Child, side 12. But the sheriff did one thing. He passed the problem to the state police. Reacher found that out 90 minutes later when a Texas Rangers cruiser turned in under the gate looking for him. Somebody directed it all the way down past the barns and in behind the bunkhouse. He heard it motor and splashing the dust on the track. He got off his bed and went down the stairs. When he got to the bottom, he was lit up by the spotlight mounted in front of its windshield. It shone in past the parked farm tractors and picked him out in a bright cone of light. The car doors opened and two rangers got out. They were not similar to the sheriff, not in any way. They were in a different class altogether. They were young and fit and professional. Both of them were medium height. Both of them were halfway between lean and muscle. Both had military-style buzz cuts. Both had immaculate uniforms. One was a sergeant and the other was a trooper. The trooper was Hispanic. He was holding a shotgun. "What?" Reacher called. "Step to the hood of the car," the sergeant called back. Reacher kept his hands clear of his body and walked to the car. "Assume the position," the sergeant said. Reacher put his palms on the fender and leaned down. The sheet metal was hot from the engine. The trooper covered him with a shotgun, and the sergeant patted him down. "Okay, get in the car," he said. Reacher didn't move. "What's this about?" he asked. "For a question of property owner to remove a trespasser." "I'm not a trespasser, I work here." "Well, I guess they just terminated you, so now you're a trespasser, and we're going to remove you." "That's a state police job?" "Small community like this, we're on call to help the local guys at days off for serious crimes." "Trespassing's a serious crime?" "No, Sunday's Echo Sheriff's Day off." The moths had found the spotlight. They fluttered in and crowded the lens, landing and taking off again when the heat of the bulb got to them. They batted against Reacher's right arm. They felt dry and papery and surprisingly heavy. "Okay, I'll leave," he said. "I'll walk out to the road." "Well, then you'll be a vagrant on a county highway. That's against the law too around here, especially during the hours of darkness." "Where are we going?" "You have to leave the county. We'll let you out in Pecos." "They owe me money. I never got paid." "So get in the car. We'll stop at the house." Reacher glanced left at the trooper and the shotgun. Both of them looked businesslike. He glanced right at the sergeant. He had his hand on the butt of his gun. He saw in his mind the two Greer boys, two versions of the same face, both of them grinning, smug, and triumphant. But it was Rusty he saw mouthing checkmate at him. "There's a problem here," he said. "The daughter-in-law's getting smacked around by her husband. It's an ongoing situation. He just got out of prison today." "She made a complaint?" "She's scared to. The sheriff's a good old boy, and she's a Hispanic woman from California." "Nothing we can do without a complaint." Reacher glanced the other way at the trooper, who just shrugged. "Like the man told you," he said. "Nothing we can do without we hear about it." "You're hearing about it now," Reacher said. "I'm telling you." The trooper shook his head. "Needs to come from the victim." "Get in the car," the sergeant said. "You don't have to do this." "Yes, we do. I need to be here for the woman's sake." "Listen, pal, we were informed you're trespassing. So all we got is a question of whether you're wanted here or whether you're not. And apparently, you're not." "The woman wants me here, like her bodyguard." "Is she the property owner?" "No, she isn't." "Are you employed by her, like officially?" Preacher shrugged. "More or less." "She paying you? You got a contract we can see?" Preacher said nothing. "So get in the car." "She's in danger." "We get a call, he'll come running." "She can't call, or if she does, the sheriff won't pass it on." "Then there's nothing we can do. Now get in the car." Reacher said nothing. The sergeant opened the rear door. Then he paused. "You could come back tomorrow," he said quietly. "No law says a man can't try to get himself rehired." Reacher took a second look at the shotgun. It was a big, handsome Ithaca with a muzzle wide enough to stick his thumb in. He took a second look at the sergeant's handgun. It was a Glock, secured into an oiled leather holster by a strap that would take about half a second to unfasten. "But right now, get in the car." Checkmate. Okay, Reacher said, but I'm not happy. Very few of our passengers are, the sergeant said back. He used his hand on the top of Reacher's head and folded him into the back seat. There was cold in there. There was a heavy wire barrier in front of him. Either side, the door openers and window liners had been removed. Small squares of aluminum had been riveted over the holes in the trim. The seat was vinyl. There was a smell of disinfectant and a heavy stink from an air freshener shaped like a pine tree hanging from the mirror in front. There was a radar device built up on top of the dash and quiet radio chatter coming from a unit underneath it. The sergeant and the trooper swung in together in front and drove him up to the house. All the Greers except Ellie were on the porch to see him go. They were standing in a line at the rail, first Rusty, then Bobby, then Sloop and Carmen. They were all smiling, all except Carmen. The sergeant stopped the car at the foot of the steps and buzzed his window down. "This guy says you owe him wages," he called. There was silence for a second, just the sound of the insects. "So tell him to sue us," Bobby called back. Reacher leaned forward to the metal grill. "Carmen," he shouted, "si hay un problema, llama directamente a estos hombres." The sergeant turned his head. "What?" "Nothing." "So what do you want to do?" Sergeant asked. "About your money?" "Forget about it," Reacher said. The sergeant buzzed his window up again and pulled out toward the gate. Reacher craned his neck and saw them all turn to watch him go, all except for Carmen, who stood absolutely still and stared rigidly ahead at the spot where the car had just been. The sergeant made a right onto the road, and Reacher turned his head the other way and saw them all filing back into the house. Then the sergeant accelerated hard, and they were lost to sight. "What was that you called out to him?" he asked. Reacher said nothing. The trooper answered for him. "It was Spanish," he said, "for the woman. It meant, 'Carmen, if there's trouble, call these guys direct.' Terrible accent." Reacher said nothing. They drove the same 60 miles he'd covered the other way in the white Cadillac, back to the Crossroads hamlet with Ellie's school and the gas station and the old diner. The sergeant stuck to a lazy 55 all the way, and it took an hour and 5 minutes. When they got there, everything was closed up tight. There were lights burning in 2 of the houses, and nothing else. Then they drove the stretch where Carmen had chased the school bus. Nobody talked. Reacher sprawled sideways on the vinyl bench and watched the darkness. Another 20 minutes north, he saw the turn where Carmen had come down out of the hills. They didn't take it. They just kept on going, heading for the main highway, and then Pecos beyond it. They never got there. The radio call came in a mile short of the county line, an hour and 35 minutes into the ride. The call was bored and laconic and loud with static. A woman dispatcher's voice. Blue 5, it said. The trooper unhooked the microphone and stretched the cord and flicked the switch. Blue 5, copy, over, he said. Required at Red House Ranch immediately, 60 miles south of North Echo Crossroads. Domestic disturbance reported, over. Copy. Nature of incident, over. Unclear at this time, believed violent, over. Well, shit, the sergeant said. Copy. On our way. Out, the trooper said. He replaced the microphone, turned around. So she understood your Spanish. I guess your accent wasn't too far off after all. Reacher said nothing. The sergeant turned his head. Look on the bright side, pal, he said. Now we can do something about it. I warned you, Reacher said, and you should have damn well listened to me. If she's hurt bad, it's on you, pal. The sergeant said nothing to that, just jammed on the brakes and pulled a wide, slow turn across the whole of the road, shoulder to shoulder, got it pointing straight south again, and hustled. He got it up to 100 on the straightaways, kept it at 90 at the curves. Didn't use the lights or the sirens. Didn't even slow at the crossroads. He didn't need to. The chances of meeting traffic on that road were worse than winning the lottery. They were back again exactly 2 hours and 30 minutes after they left. 95 minutes north, 55 minutes south. First thing they saw was the sheriff's second-hand cruiser, dumped at an angle in the yard, door open, light bar flashing. The sergeant slid through the dirt and jammed to a stop right behind it. Hell's he doing here, he said. It's his day off. There was nobody in sight. The trooper opened his door. The sergeant shut down the motor and did the same. Let me out, Reacher said. No dice, pal, the sergeant said back. You stay right there. They got out and walked together to the porch steps. They went up, across the boards. They pushed the door. It was open. They went inside. The door swung shut behind them. Reacher waited. 5 minutes. 7. 10. The car grew warm, then hot. There was silence. No sound at all beyond random static from the radio and the ticking of the insects. The trooper came out alone after about 12 minutes, walked slowly back to his side of the car and opened his door and leaned in for the microphone. Is she okay? Reacher asked. The guy nodded sourly. She's fine, he said, at least physically, but she's in a shitload of trouble. Why? Because the call wasn't about him attacking her. It was the other way around. She shot him. He's dead. So we just arrested her. The trooper clicked the microphone and called in for backup and an ambulance. Then he dictated an interim report to the dispatcher. He used the words gunshot wounds twice and homicide 3 times. Hey, Reacher called to him, stop calling it homicide on the radio. Why? Because it was self-defense. He was beating her. We all need to get that straight from the start. Not for me to say. You either. Reacher shook his head. It is for you to say, because what you say now counts for something later. You put it in people's heads it's a homicide, it'll be tough for her. Better that everybody's real clear from the start about what it is. I don't have that kind of influence. Yes, you do. How would you know what kind of influence I have? Because I was you once upon a time. I was a cop in the military. I called things in. I know how it works. The trooper said nothing. She's got a kid, Reacher said. You should remember that. So she needs minimum bail and she needs it tonight. You can influence that for her. She shot him, the trooper said. She should have thought about all that before. The guy was beating up on her. It was self-defense. The trooper said nothing. Give her a break, okay? Don't make her a victim twice over. She's the victim? Her husband is the one lying there dead. You should have some sympathy. You must know how it is for her. Why? What's the connection between her and me? Now it was Reacher who said nothing. You think I should cut her a break just because I'm Hispanic and she is too? You wouldn't be cutting her a break, Reacher said. You'd be being accurate is all. She needs your help. The trooper hung up the microphone. Now you're offending me, he said. He backed out of the car and slammed the door, walked away up to the house again. Reacher glanced through the window to his right, toward the rocky land west of the compound, full of regret. I knew how it'd be, he thought. I should have made her leave the damn gun up there on the mesa. Or I should have taken care of the whole thing myself. The state cops stayed inside the house, and Reacher saw nothing until a backup arrived more than an hour later. It was an identical cruiser with another trooper driving and another sergeant riding alongside him. This time, the trooper was white and the sergeant was Hispanic. They got out of their car and walked straight into the house. The heat and the quiet came back. There were animal howls in the far distance, and the whisper of insects and the beating of invisible wings. Lights came on in some of the house windows and then snapped off again. After 20 minutes, the Echo sheriff left. He came out of the house and stumbled down the porch steps to his car. He looked tired and disoriented. His shirt was dark with sweat. He maneuvered his cruiser out from behind the tangle of police vehicles and drove away. Another hour later, the ambulance came. It had its emergency lights on. Reacher saw the night pulsing red far to the south, and then bright headlight beams in a boxy vehicle painted red and gold and white lurching in through the gate. It was marked Presidio Fire Department. Maybe it was the same truck Billy had called the night before. It turned a slow circle in the yard and backed up to the porch steps. The crew got out lazily and stretched and yawned in the dark. They knew they weren't about to be called on for their paramedic skills. They opened the rear doors and took out a rolling gurney, and the backup sergeant met them on the steps and led them inside. Reacher was sweating inside the car. It was airless and hot. He traced in his mind the medics walking through the interior hallways to the bedroom, attending to the corpse, lifting it onto the gurney, rolling the gurney out. It was going to be difficult to handle. There were narrow stairs and tight corners. But they came back out about as fast as was feasible and lifted the gurney down the porch steps. Sloop Greer was just a large, heavy shape on it, wound into a white sheet. The medics lined up the gurney with the rear of the ambulance and pushed. The wheels folded up and the gurney slid inside and the medics closed the door on it. Then they stood around in a group with 3 of the cops. The trooper whom Reacher had offended wasn't there. He must have been guarding Carmen somewhere inside the house. The 3 cops out in the yard were slow and relaxed. The excitement was over. The deal was done. So they were standing there a little deflated, maybe a little disappointed, the way cops often get, like something had happened they were supposed to prevent from happening. Reacher knew exactly how they felt. They talked for a couple of minutes, and then the ambulance crew climbed back into their cab and bounced their vehicle across the yard to the gate. It paused there for a second and turned right and headed slowly north. The cops watched it until it was gone, and then they turned together and headed back inside the house. 5 minutes later, they came out again, all 4 of them, and this time they brought Carmen with them. She was dressed in the same jeans and shirt. Her hair was heavy with water. Her hands were cupped behind her back. Her head was down, and her face was pale and filmed with sweat, and her eyes were black. The backup cops held an elbow each. They brought her down the steps slowly and clumsily, 3 people moving out of step. They stopped and regrouped in the dirt and walked her over to their cruiser. The trooper opened the rear door, and the sergeant placed a hand on the top of her head and folded her inside. She offered no resistance. She was completely passive. Reacher saw her shuffle sideways on the seat, looking awkward and uncomfortable with her hands trapped behind her. Then she hitched her feet in after her, pointing her toes, suddenly looking elegant again. The trooper waited a beat and closed the door on her, and Rusty and Bobby came out on the porch to watch her go. Rusty's hair was a mess, like she'd been to bed and gotten up again. She was wearing a short satin robe that shone in the porch lights. It was white, and below it, her legs were as pale as a fabric. Bobby was behind her. He was in jeans and a t-shirt, and he was barefoot. They pressed up against the porch rail. Both of their faces were pale and stunned. Their eyes were wide and blank and staring. The backup cops climbed into their cruiser and started it up. The first 2 slid into the front of Reacher's car and did the same. They waited for the backup to ease ahead and then followed it out to the gate. Reacher turned his head and saw Rusty and Bobby craning to watch them go. The cars paused and turned right together and accelerated north. Reacher turned his head the other way, and the last thing he saw was Ellie stumbling out onto the porch. She was in her rabbit pajamas, was carrying a small bear in her left hand, and had the knuckles of her right pressed hard into her mouth. The inside of the cop car cooled right down after about a mile. There was an aperture in the wire grill in front of him, and if he sat in the middle of the seat and ducked his head, he could line it up with the view through the windshield above the radar unit and below the mirror. It was like watching a movie unfold in front of him. The backup car swayed in the headlight beams, close and vivid and unreal in the intense dusty blackness all around it. He couldn't see Carmen. Maybe she was slumped down in the seat and her head was hidden behind the police lights stacked along the rear shelf behind the glass. "Where are they taking her?" he called. The sergeant shifted in his seat, answered 100 yards later. "Pecos," he said. "County jail." "But this is Echo," Reacher said, "not Pecos." "There are 150 people in Echo County. You think they operate a separate jurisdiction just for them, with jails and all, and courthouses? So how does it work?" "Pecos picks it up, and that's how it works, for all the little counties around and about, all the administrative functions." Reacher was quiet for a beat. "Well, that's going to be a real big problem," he said. "Why?" "Because Hack Walker is the Pecos DA, and he was Sloop Greer's best buddy, so he'll be prosecuting the person who shot his friend." "Worried about a conflict of interest?" "Aren't you?" "Not really," the sergeant said. "We know Hack. He's not a fool. He sees some defense counsel about to nail him for impropriety, he'll pass on it. He'll have to. What's the word? Excuse himself?" "Recuse," Reacher said. "Whatever. He'll give it to an assistant. And I think both Pecos ADAs are women, actually. So the self-defense thing will get some sympathy." It doesn't need sympathy, Reacher said. It's plain as day. And Hack's running for judge in November, the sergeant said. Bear that in mind. Lots of Mexican votes in Pecos County. He won't let anybody do anything that'll give a lawyer a chance to make him look bad in the newspaper. So she's lucky, really. A Mexican woman shoots a white man in Echo, gets tried for it by a woman ADA in Pecos. Couldn't be better for her. She's from California, Reacher said. She's not Mexican. But she looks Mexican, the sergeant said. That's what's important to a guy who needs votes in Pecos County. The two state police cruisers drove on in convoy. They caught and passed the ambulance just short of the school and the gas station and the diner at the crossroads, left it lumbering north in their wake. The morgue's in Pecos too, the sergeant said. One of the oldest institutions in town, I guess. They needed it right from the get-go. Pecos was that kind of a place. Preacher nodded behind him. Carmen told me, he said. It was a real Wild West. You gonna stick around? I guess so. I need to see she's okay. She told me there's a museum in town. Things to see. Somebody's grave. Clay Allison's, sergeant said. Some old gunslinger. Never killed a man who didn't need killing. The sergeant nodded in the mirror. That could be her position, right? She could call it the Clay Allison defense. Why not? Reacher said. It was justifiable homicide any way you cut it. The sergeant said nothing to that. Should be enough to make bail at least, Reacher said. She's got a kid back there. She needs bail, like tomorrow. The sergeant glanced in the mirror again. Tomorrow could be tough, he said. There's a dead guy in the picture after all. Who's her lawyer? Hasn't got one. She got money for one? No. Well, shit, the sergeant said. What? Reacher asked. How old's the kid? 6.5. The sergeant went quiet. What? Reacher asked again. Having no lawyer's a big problem is what. Kid's gonna be 7.5 before Mom even gets a bail hearing. She'll get a lawyer, right? Sure, Constitution says so. But the question is, when? This is Texas. You ask for a lawyer, you don't get one right away? Not right away. You wait a long, long time. You get one when the indictment comes back. And that's how old Hack Walker's going to avoid his little conflict problem, isn't it? He'll just lock her up and forget about her. He'd be a fool not to. You got no lawyer, who's to know? Could be Christmas before they get around to indicting her. By which time old Hack will be a judge, most likely, not a prosecutor. He'll be long gone. No more conflict of interest. Unless he happens to pull the case later, whereupon he'd have to excuse himself anyway. Recuse. Whatever. Not having her own lawyer changes everything. The trooper in the passenger seat turned and spoke for the first time in an hour. See? He said. Didn't matter what I called it on the radio. So don't you spend your time at the museum, Sergeant said. You want to help her. You go find her a lawyer. You go beg, borrow, or steal her one. Nobody spoke the rest of the way into Pecos County. They crossed under Interstate 10 and followed the backup car across more empty blackness all the way to Interstate 20, about 100 miles west of where Reacher had forced his way out of Carmen's Cadillac 60 hours previously. The sergeant slowed the car and let the backup disappear ahead into the darkness. He braked and pulled off onto the shoulder 100 yards short of the cloverleaf. We're back on patrol from here, he said. Time to let you out. Can't you drive me to the jail? You're not going to jail. You haven't done anything. And we're not a taxicab company. So where am I? The sergeant pointed straight ahead. Downtown Pecos, he said. A couple miles that way. Where's the jail? Crossroads before the railroad. In the courthouse basement. The sergeant opened his door and slid out and stretched. Stepped back and opened Reacher's door with a flourish. Reacher slid out feet first and stood up. It was still hot. Haze hid the stars. Lonely vehicles whined by on the highway bridge, few enough in number for absolute silence to descend between each one. The shoulder was sandy, and stunted velvet mesquite and wild indigo struggled at its margin. The cruiser's headlights picked out old dented beer cans tangled among the stalks. "You take care now," the sergeant said. He climbed back into his seat and slammed his door. The car crunched its way back to the blacktop and curved to the right, onto the cloverleaf, up onto the highway. Reacher stood and watched its taillights disappear in the east. Then he set off walking north, under the overpass, toward the neon glow of Pecos. He walked through one pool of light after another, along a strip of motels which got smarter and more expensive the farther he moved away from the highway. Then there was a rodeo arena set back from the street with posters still in place from a big event a month ago.
"There's a rodeo there in July,"
Carmen had said.
"but you've missed it for this year."
He walked in the road because the sidewalks had long tables set up on them, like outdoor market stalls. They were all empty, but he could smell cantaloupe on the hot night air.
"The sweetest in the whole of Texas,"
She had said.
"Different, in their opinion, in the whole of the world."
He guessed an hour before dawn old trucks would roll in loaded with ripe fruit from the fields, maybe hosed down with irrigation water to make it look dewy and fresh and attractive. Maybe the old trucks would have whole families crammed in cabs, ready to unload and sell all day and find out whether their winter was going to be good or bad, lean or prosperous. But really, he knew nothing at all about agriculture. All his ideas came from the movies. Maybe it was all different in reality. Maybe there were government subsidies involved, or giant corporations. Beyond the cantaloupe market was a pair of eating places. There was a donut shop and a pizza parlor. Both of them were dark and closed up tight. Sunday, the middle of the night, miles from anywhere. At the end of the strip was a crossroads with a sign showing the museum was straight across. But before the turn, on the right, was the courthouse. It was a nice enough building, but he didn't spend any time looking at it. Just up around the side to the back. No jail he'd ever seen had an entrance on the street. There was a lit doorway in the back wall at semi-basement level with 2 cement steps leading down from a parking area. There was a dusty 4-cylinder Chevrolet in one corner. The lot was fenced with razor wire and hung with large notices warning unauthorized parkers their cars would be towed. There were yellow light bulbs mounted on the fence posts. Clouds of silent insects crowded each of them. The blacktop was still hot under his feet. No cooling breezes back there. The jail door was scarred steel and had "No Admittance" stenciled across it in faded paint. Above it was a small video camera angled down with a red diode glowing above the lens. He went down the steps and knocked hard on the door. Stepped back a pace so the camera could pick him up. Nothing happened for a long moment. He stepped forward and knocked again. There was a click of a lock and a woman opened the door. She was dressed in a court bailiff's uniform. She was white, maybe 50, with gray hair dyed the color of sand. She had a wide belt loaded with a gun and a nightstick and a can of pepper spray. She was heavy and slow, but she looked awake and on the ball. "Yes," she said. "You got Carmen Greer in here?" "Yes." "Can I see her?" "No." "Not even for a minute?" "Not even." "So when can I?" "You family?" "I'm a friend." "Not a lawyer, right?" "No." "Then Saturday," the woman said. "Visiting is Saturday, 2 to 4. Almost a week. "Can you write that down for me?" he said. He wanted to get inside. "Maybe give me a list of what I'm allowed to bring her?" The bailiff shrugged and turned and stepped inside. Reacher followed her into the dry chill of an air conditioner running on high. There was a lobby. The bailiff had a high desk, like a lectern, like a barrier. Behind it were cubby holes covering the back wall. He saw Carmen's lizard skin belt rolled into one of them. There was a small Ziploc bag with a fake ring in it. Off to the right was a barred door, a tiled corridor beyond. "How is she?" he asked. The bailiff shrugged again. "She ain't happy." "About what?" "About the cavity search, mainly. She was screaming fit to burst. But rules are rules. And what? She thinks I enjoy it either?" She pulled a mimeograph sheet from a stack, slid it across the top of the desk. "Saturday, 2 to 4, she said. "Like I told you. And don't bring her anything that's not on the list or we won't let you in." "Where's the DA's office?" She pointed at the ceiling. Second floor, go in the front. When is it open? About 8:30. You got bail bondsmen in the neighborhood? She smiled. Ever see a courthouse that did? Turn left at the crossroads. What about lawyers? Cheap lawyers or expensive lawyers? Free lawyers. She smiled again. Same street, she said. That's all it is. Bondsmen and community lawyers. Sure I can't see her? Saturday you can see her all you want. Not now? Not even for a minute? Not even. She's got a daughter, Reacher said, irrelevantly. Breaks my heart, the woman said back. When will you see her? Every 15 minutes, whether she likes it or not. Suicide walk. Though I don't think your friends are tight. You can tell pretty easy. And she's a tough cookie, that's my estimation. But rules are rules, right? Tell her Reacher was here. Who? Reacher. Tell her I'll stick around. The woman nodded, like she'd seen it all, which she probably had. I'm sure she'll be thrilled, she said. Then Reacher walked back to the motel strip, remembering all the jailhouse duty he'd pulled early in his career, wishing he could put his hand on his heart and say he'd acted a whole lot better than the woman he'd just met. He walked almost all the way back to the highway, until the prices ducked under $30, picked a place and woke the night clerk and bought the key to a room near the end of the row. It was worn and faded and crusted with the kind of dirt that shows the staff isn't all the way committed to excellence. The bedding was limp and the air smelled dank and hot, like they saved power by turning the air conditioning off when the room wasn't rented. But it was serviceable. One advantage of being ex-military was almost any place was serviceable. There was always somewhere worse to compare it with. Echo Burning by Lee Child, side 13. Reacher slept restlessly until 7 in the morning and showered in tepid water and went out for breakfast at the donut shop halfway back to the courthouse. It was open early and advertised Texas-sized donuts. They were larger than normal and more expensive. He ate 2 with 3 cups of coffee. Then he went looking for clothes. Since he ended his brief flirtation with owning a house, he'd gone back to his preferred system of buying cheap items and junking them instead of laundering them. It worked well for him. It kept the permanence monkey off his back, literally. He found a cheap store that had already been open an hour. It sold a little bit of everything, from bales of cheap toilet paper to work boots. He found a rack of chinos with the brand labels cut out. Maybe they were flawed. Maybe they were stolen. He found the right size and paired them with a khaki shirt. It was thin and cut loose like something from Hawaii, but it was plain, and it cost less than a Texas-sized donut. He found white underwear. The store had no fitting rooms. It wasn't that kind of place. He talked the clerk into letting him use the staff bathroom. He put on the new gear and transferred his stuff from pocket to pocket. He still had the 8 shell cases from Carmen's Larkin rattling around like loose change. He waved them in his hand, and then dropped them in his new pants pocket. He balled up the old clothes and stuffed them in the bathroom trash. Went back out to the register and paid $30 in cash. He might get 3 days out of it. $10 a day, just for clothes. Made no sense at all. Until you figured a washing machine cost $400, and a dryer another $3, and the basement to put them in implied a house, which cost at least $100,000 to buy, and then tens of thousands a year in taxes, and maintenance, and insurance, and associated bullshit. Then, $10 a day for clothes suddenly made all the sense in the world. He waited on the sidewalk until 8 o'clock, leaning against a wall under an awning to stay out of the sun. He figured the bailiff would change shifts at 8. That'd be normal. And sure enough, at 5 minutes past, he saw the heavy woman drive herself out of the lot in a dusty 4-cylinder Chevrolet. She made a left and drove right past him. He crossed the street and walked down the side of the courthouse again. If the night shift won't help you, maybe the day shift will. Night workers are always tougher. Less regular contact with the public, less immediate supervision. Makes them think they're king of the castle. But the day worker was just as bad. He was a man, a little younger, a little thinner, but otherwise the exact equivalent of his opposite number. The conversation was just the same. Can I see her? No. When? Saturday. Is she okay? What else can be expected? It sounded like something you'd hear in front of a hospital from a cautious spokesperson. The guy confirmed only lawyers were allowed unrestricted access to the prisoner. So Reacher came back up the steps and went out looking for a lawyer. It was clear that the events of the previous night had left the Red House stunned and quiet, and depopulated, which suited the killing crew just fine. The ranch hands weren't there, the tall stranger was gone, and Carla Greer was gone. And her husband, obviously. That left just the old woman, the second son, and the granddaughter. 3 of them, all at home. It was Monday, but the kid hadn't gone to school. The bus came and went without her. She just hung around, in and out of the barn. She looked confused and listless. They all did, which made them easier to watch. Better targets. The 2 men were behind a rock, opposite the ranch gate, well hidden and elevated about 20 feet up the slope. Their view was good enough. The woman had dropped them 300 yards north and driven back toward Pico. "When do we do this?" they had asked her. "When I say," she had replied. Reacher turned left at the crossroads in the center of Pecos and followed a street that ran parallel with railroad tracks. He passed the bus depot and hit a strip that might have started out as anything, but now was made up entirely of low-rent operations serving the courthouse population. Bail bondsmen and storefront legal missions, like the night shift woman had said. The legal missions all had rows of desks facing the store windows with customer chairs in front of them and waiting areas inside the doors. All of them were grimy and undecorated and messy, with piles of files everywhere and notes and memos taped and tacked to the walls next to the desks. 20 past 8 in the morning, they were all busy. They all had patient knots of people waiting inside and anxious clients perched on the customer chairs. Some of the clients were on their own, but most of them were in family groups, some of them with a bunch of children. All of them were Hispanic. So were some of the lawyers, but overall they were a mixed bunch. Men, women, young, old, bright, defeated. The only thing they had in common was they all looked harassed to breaking point. He chose the only establishment that had an empty chair in front of a lawyer. It was halfway down the street, and the chair was way in the back of the store, and the lawyer was a young white woman of maybe 25, with thick dark hair cut short. She had a good tan, and was wearing a white sports bra instead of a shirt, and there was a leather jacket slung over the back of her chair. She was nearly hidden behind 2 tall stacks of files. She was on the phone, and she was on the point of tears. He approached her desk and waited for a sit-down gesture. He didn't get one, but he sat down anyway. She glanced at him and glanced away, kept on talking into the phone. She had dark eyes and white teeth. She was talking slow Spanish with an East Coast accent, haltingly enough that he could follow most of it. She was saying, "Yes, we won." Then, "But he won't pay. He said he won't. He just refuses." Time to time, she'd stop and listen to whoever was on the other end. Then she would repeat herself. "We won, but he still won't pay." Then she listened again. The question must have been, "So what do we do now?" Because she said, "We go back to court to enforce the judgment." Then the question was obviously, "How long does that take?" Because she went very quiet and said, "A year, maybe 2. Reacher heard clear silence at the other end and watched the woman's face. She was upset and embarrassed and humiliated, licking back tears of bitter frustration. She said, "Llamaré de nuevo más tarde," and hung up. "I'll call again soon." Then she faced front and closed her eyes and breathed deeply through her nose, in and out, in and out. She rested her hands, palms down on the desk, breathed some more. Maybe it was a relaxation technique they taught you in law school, but it didn't seem to be working. She opened her eyes and dropped the file into a drawer and focused between the piles of paper across the desk at Reacher. "Problem?" he asked her. She shrugged and nodded all at the same time, an all-purpose expression of misery. "Winning a case is only half the battle," she said. "Sometimes a lot less than half, believe me." "So what happened?" She shook her head. "We don't need to go into it." "Some guy won't pay up," Reacher said. She shrugged and nodded again.
A rancher, she said. Crashed his car into my client's truck. Injured my client and his wife and two of his children. It was early in the morning. He was on his way back from a party, drunk. They were on their way to market. It was harvest time, and they couldn't work the fields, and they lost their whole crop.
Cantaloupe?
Bell peppers, actually. Rotted on the vine. We sued and won. $20,000. But the guy won't pay. He just refuses. He's waiting him out. He plans to starve him back to Mexico, and he will. Because if we have to go back to court, it would take at least another year, and they can't live another whole year on fresh air, can they?
They didn't have insurance.
Premiums are way too expensive. These people are barely scratching the limit. All we could do is proceed directly against the rancher. Solid case, well presented, and we won. But the old guy's sitting tight with a big smirk on his damn face.
Tough break, Rachel said.
Unbelievable, she said. The things these people go through, you just wouldn't believe it. This family I'm telling you about, the Border Patrol killed their eldest son.
They did?
She nodded. 12 years ago. They were illegals. Paid their life savings to some guy to get him here, and he just abandoned me in the desert. No food, no water. They're holding up in the daytime and walking north at night, and a patrol chases them in the dark with rifles and kills their eldest boy. They bury him and walk on.
Anything get done about it?
Are you kidding? They were illegals. They couldn't do anything. It happened all the time. Everybody's got a story like that. And now they've settled and been through the immigration amnesty. We try to get them to trust the law. And then something like this happens. I feel like such a fool.
Not your fault.
It is my fault. I should know better. Trust us, I tell them.
She went quiet, and Rachel watched her try to recover.
Anyway,
She said, and then nothing more. She looked away. She was a good-looking woman. It was very hot. There was a single air conditioner stuck in the fanlight over the door. A big old thing, a long way away. It was doing its best.
Anyway,
She said again. Looked at her.
how can I help you?
Not me, Rachel said. A woman I know.
Do you need the lawyer?
She shot her husband. He was abusing her.
When?
Last night. She's across the street in jail.
Is he dead?
Rachel nodded. As a doornail. Her shoulders sagged. She opened the drawer and took out a yellow pad.
What's your name?
She asked. My name?
You're the one talking to me.
Reacher, he said. What's your name? She wrote Reacher on the pad, first line.
Alice,
She said.
Alice Amanda Allen.
You should go into private practice. You'd be first in the yellow pages. She smiled, just a little.
One day I will,
She said.
This is a 5-year bargain with my conscience.
Paying your dues?
Atoning,
She said.
for my good fortune. For going to Harvard Law. For coming from a family where $20,000 is a month's common charge in the Park Avenue Co-op instead of life or death during the winter in Texas.
Good for you, Alice, he said.
So tell me about your woman friend.
She's of Mexican heritage, and her husband was white. Her name's Carmen Greer, and her husband was Sloop Greer.
Sloop?
Like a boat,
Okay.
Alice said, and wrote it all down. The abuse stopped for the last year and a half because he was in prison for tax evasion. He got out yesterday and started it up again. She shot him.
Okay.
Evidence and witnesses are going to be hard to find. The abuse was covert,
Injuries?
fairly severe. But she always passed them off as accidental, to do with horses.
Horses?
Like she fell off them.
Why?
Reacher shrugged. I don't know. Family dynamic, coercion, shame, fear, embarrassment, maybe.
But there's no doubt the abuse happened.
Not in my mind. Alice stopped writing, stared down at the yellow paper.
Well, it's not going to be easy, she said. Texas law isn't too far behind the times on spousal abuse, but I prefer lots of clear evidence. But a spell in prison helps us. Not a model citizen, is he? We could plead it down to involuntary manslaughter. Maybe settle for time served with probation. If we work hard, we stand a chance.
It was justifiable homicide, not manslaughter.
I'm sure it was. But it's a question of what'll work and what won't.
And she needs bail, Reacher said. Today. Alice looked up from the paper and stared at him.
Bail?
She repeated like it was a foreign word.
Today? Forget about it.
She's got a kid, a little girl, 6.5. She wrote it down.
Doesn't help, she said. Everybody's got kids.
She ran her fingers up and down the tall stacks of files.
They've all got kids,
She said again.
6.5, 1.5, 2 kids, 6, 7, 10.
She's called Ellie, Rachel said. She needs her mother. Alice wrote Ellie on the pad and connected it with an arrow to Carmen Greer.
Only 2 ways to get bail in a case like this, she said. First way is we stage essentially the whole trial at the bail hearing. And we're not ready to do that. It'll be months before I can even start working on it. My calendar is totally full. And even when I can start, it'll take months to prepare in these circumstances.
What circumstances?
Her word against the dead man's reputation. If we've got no eyewitnesses, we'll have to subpoena her medical records and find experts who can testify her injuries weren't caused by falling off horses. And clearly she's got no money, or you wouldn't be in here on her behalf, so we're going to have to find some experts who will appear for free, which isn't impossible, but it can't be done in a hurry.
So what can be done in a hurry?
I can run over to jail and say, "Hi, I'm your lawyer. I'll see you again in a year." That's about all can be done in a hurry.
Reacher glanced around the room. It was teeming with people.
Nobody else would be faster, Alice said. I'm relatively new here. I got a lot less backlog.
It seemed to be true. She had just 2 head-high stacks of files on her desk. The others all had 3 or 4 or 5. What's the second way?
Of what?
Getting bail. You said there were 2 ways. She nodded.
Second way is we convince the DA not to oppose it. If we stand up and ask for bail, and he stands up and says he has no objection, then all that matters is whether the judge thinks it's appropriate. And the judge will be influenced by the DA's position, probably.
Pat Walker was Sloop Greer's oldest buddy. Alice's shoulders sagged again.
Right, she said. He'll accuse himself, obviously, but his staff will go to bat for him. So forget bail. It isn't going to happen.
But you will take the case.
Sure I will. That's what we do here. We take cases. So I'll call Hatch's office and I'll go see Connie. But that's all I can do right now, you understand? Apart from that, right now taking the case is the same thing as not taking the case.
Preacher sat still for a second. Then he shook his head. Not good enough, Alice, he said. I want you to get to work right now. Make something happen.
I can't, she said. Not for months. I told you that.
She went quiet and he watched her for a second more. You interested in a deal? He asked.
A deal?
Like, I help you, you help me.
How can you help me?
There are things I could do for you. Like, I could recover the 20 grand for your pepper growers. Today. And then you could start work for Carmen Greer. Today.
What are you, a debt collector?
No, but I'm a quick learner. It's probably not rocket science.
I can't let you do that. It's probably illegal, unless you're registered somewhere.
Just suppose next time you saw me, I was walking back in here with a check for 20 grand in my pocket.
How would you do that?
He shrugged. I'd just go ask the guy for it.
And that'd work?
It might, he said. She shook her head.
It would be unethical.
As opposed to what? She didn't answer for a long time. Just stared off somewhere behind his head. But then he saw her glance down at the phone. He saw her rehearsing the good news call in her mind. Who's the rancher, he asked. She glanced at the drawer, shook her head again.
I can't tell you, she said. I'm worried about the ethics.
I'm offering, he said. You're not asking. She sat still. I'm volunteering, he said, like a paralegal assistant. She looked straight at him.
I'd have to go to the bathroom, she said.
She stood up suddenly and walked away. She was wearing denim shorts, and she was taller than he'd guessed. Short shorts, long legs, a fine tan. Walking, she looked pretty good from the back. She went through a door in the rear wall of the old store. He stood up and leaned over the desk and pulled open the drawer, lifted the top file out and reversed it so he could read it. It was full of legal paper. He shuffled through to some kind of a deposition printed on a single sheet. There was a name and address typed neatly in a box labeled Defendant. He folded the paper into quarters and put it in his shirt pocket, closed the file and dropped it back in the drawer, hooked the drawer shut, and sat down again. A moment later, Alice Amanda Aaron came out through the rear door and walked back to the desk. She looked pretty good from the front, too. Any place around here I can borrow a car? He asked her.
You don't have one?
He shook his head.
Well, you can borrow mine, I guess, she said. It's in the lock behind the building.
She fiddled in her jacket pocket behind her, came out with a set of keys.
It's a VW, she said.
He took the keys from her.
There are maps in the glove box, she said. You know, in case a person isn't familiar with the area.
He pushed back from the desk. Maybe I'll catch you later, he said. She said nothing. He stood up and walked through the quiet crowd of people and out into the sun. Alice's car was the only VW in the lot behind the building. It was baking in the sun right in the center. A new shaped Beetle, bright yellow in color, New York plates, about a year and a half old. And there was more than a bunch of maps in the glove box. There was a handgun in there, too. It was a beautiful nickel-finished Heckler & Koch P7 M10, 4-inch barrel, 10 40 caliber shells. In Reacher's day, the Army had wanted the same thing in the 9mm blue steel version. But the Defense Department had balked at the cost, which must have been about 16 times the price of Harmon Greer's $80 Lorcan. He was a fine, fine piece. One of the best available. Maybe it was a gift from the family back on Park Avenue. Maybe the car was, too. He could just imagine it. The VW was an easy choice, the perfect graduation present. But the gun might have caused some consternation. The parents would have been sitting up there in their high floor in New York worrying about it.
She's going to work where? With poor people? She'll need protection, surely.
So they would have researched the whole matter thoroughly and gone out and bought her the best on the market, like they would have bought her a Rolex if she'd needed a watch. Out of habit, he took it apart and checked the action and reassembled it. It was new, but it had been fired and cleaned maybe 4 or 5 times. It spoke of conscientious hours put in at the practice range. Maybe some exclusive Manhattan basement. He smiled, slotted it back in the glove box under the maps. Then he racked the seat all the way back and fiddled with the key and fired the engine up and started the air running. He took the maps out of the glove box and spread them on the empty seat beside him. Took the folded paper from his shirt pocket and checked the maps for the ranch's address. It seemed to be somewhere north and east of town, maybe an hour away if he hustled hard. The VW had a manual transmission with a sharp clutch, and he stalled twice before he got the hang of driving it. He felt awkward and conspicuous. The ride was firm, and there was some kind of bud base attached to the dash, loaded with a little pink balloon that was reviving steadily as the car got colder. There was a subtle perfume in the air. He'd learned to drive nearly 25 years before, underage and illegally, in a Marine Corps deuce and a half, with the driving seat 6 feet off the ground. And he felt about as far away from that experience as it was possible to get. The map showed 7 ways out of Pecos. He'd come in on the southernmost, and it didn't have what he was looking for, so he had 6 to cover. His instinct led him west. The town's center of gravity seemed to be lumped to the east of the crossroads, therefore east would be definitely wrong. So he drove away from the lawyers and the bondsmen in the direction of El Paso, and followed a slight right-hand curve and found exactly what he wanted, all spread out in front of him and receding into the distance. Every town of any size has a strip of auto dealers clustered together on one of the approaches, and Pecos was no different. He cruised up the strip and turned around and cruised back, looking for the right kind of place. There were 2 possibilities. Both of them had gaudy signs offering foreign car service. Both of them offered free loaners. He chose the place farther out of town. It had a used car business in front with a dozen clunkers decked with flags and low prices on their windshields, an office and a trailer. Behind the sales lot was a long, low shed with hydraulic hoists. The floor of the shed was oil-stained earth. There were 4 mechanics visible. One of them was halfway underneath a British sports car. The other 3 were unoccupied. A slow start to a hot Monday morning. He drove the yellow VW right into the shed. The 3 unoccupied mechanics drifted over to it. One of them looked like a foreman. Reacher asked him to adjust the VW's clutch so that its action would be softer. The guy looked happy to be offered the work. He said it would cost $40. Reacher agreed the price and asked for a loaner. The guy led him behind the shed and pointed to an ancient Chrysler LeBaron convertible. It had been white once, but now it was khaki with age and sunlight. Reacher took Alice's gun with him, wrapped up in her maps like a store-bought package. He placed it on the Chrysler's passenger seat. Then he asked the mechanic for a tow rope. "What do you want to tow?" the guy asked. "Nothing," Reacher said. "I just want the rope is all." "You want a rope, but you don't want to tow anything?" "You got it," Reacher said. The guy shrugged and walked away. came back with a coil of rope. Reacher put it in the passenger footwell. Then he drove the LeBaron back into town and out again, heading north and east, feeling a whole lot better about the day. Only a fool would try unlicensed debt collecting in the wilds of Texas in a bright yellow car with New York plates and a bud vase on the deck. He stopped once in empty country to unscrew the Chrysler's plates with a penny from his pocket. He stored them on the floor on the passenger side, next to the coil of rope. Put the bolts in the glove box. Then he drove on, looking for his destination. He was maybe 3 hours north of the Greer place, and the land looked pretty much the same, except it was better irrigated. Grass was growing. The mesquite had been burned back. There were cultivated acres with green bushes all over them, peppers maybe, or cantaloupe. He had no idea. There was wild indigo on the shoulders of the road, an occasional prickly pear. No people. The sun was high, and the horizon was shimmering. The rancher's name was listed on the legal paper as Lyndon J. Brewer. His address was just a route number, which Alice's map showed was a stretch of road that ran about 40 miles before it disappeared into New Mexico. It was the same sort of road as the drag heading south out of Echo down to the Greer place, a dusty blacktop ribbon, and a string of drooping power lines punctuated by big ranch gates about every 15 miles. The ranches had names, which weren't necessarily going to be the names of the owners, like the Red House had nowhere been labeled Greer. So finding Lyndon J. Brewer in person wasn't necessarily going to be easy. But then it was, because the road was crossed by another, and the resulting crossroads had a line of mailboxes laid out along the gray weathered plank, and the mailboxes had people's names and ranch names on them together. Brewer was painted freehand in black on a white box, and a Big Hat Ranch was painted right below it. He found the entrance to the Big Hat Ranch 15 miles to the north. There was a fancy iron arch painted white, like something you might see holding up a conservatory roof in Charleston and New Orleans. He drove right past it and stopped on the shoulder of the road at the foot of the next power line pole. Got out of the car and looked straight up. There was a big transformer can at the top of the pole where the line split off in a T and ran away at a right angle toward where the ranch house must be. And looping parallel all the way, about a foot lower down, the telephone line ran with it. He took Alice's gun from under the maps on the passenger seat and the rope from the footwell, tied one end of the rope into the trigger guard with a single neat knot, passed 20 feet of rope through his hands, and swung the gun like a weight. Then he clamped the rope with his left hand and threw the gun with his right, aiming to slot it between the phone line and the electricity supply above it. The first time he missed. The gun fell about a foot short, and he caught it coming down. The second time he threw a little harder, and it hit just right. The gun sailed through the gap and fell and snagged the rope over the wire. He played the rope out over his left palm and lowered the gun back down to himself, untied it and tossed it back into the car and clamped the looped rope in both hands and pulled sharply. The phone line broke at the junction box and snaked down to the ground, all the way up to the next pole 100 yards away. He coiled the rope again and dropped it back in the footwell. Got in the car and backed up and turned in under the white painted gate. Drove the best part of a mile down a private driveway to a white painted house that should have been in a historical movie. It had 4 massive columns at the front, holding up a second-story balcony. There were broad steps leading up to a double front door. There was a tended lawn, a parking area made from raked gravel. He stopped the car on the gravel at the bottom of the steps and shut off the motor. Tucked his shirt tight into the waistband of his pants. Some girl who worked as a personal trainer had told him it made his upper body look more triangular. He slipped the gun into his right hip pocket. Its shape showed through nicely. Then he rolled the sleeves of his new shirt all the way up to the shoulders, gripped the LeBaron's wheel and squeezed until it started to give and the veins in his biceps were standing out big and obvious. When you've got arms bigger than most people's legs, sometimes you need to exploit what nature has given you. He got out of the car and went up the steps. Used a bell pull he found to the right of the door. Heard a chime somewhere deep inside the mansion. Then he waited. He was about to use the bell again when the left-hand door opened. There was a maid standing there, about half the height of the door. She was dressed in a gray uniform and looked like she came from the Philippines. "I'm here to see Lyndon Brewer," Reacher said. "Do you have an appointment?" the maid said. Her English was very good. "Yes, I do." "You didn't tell me." He probably forgot, Rachel said. I understand he's a bit of an asshole. Her face tensed, not with shock. She was fighting a smile.
Who shall I announce?
Rutherford B. Hayes, Rachel said. The maid paused, and then smiled finally.
He was the 19th president,
She said.
the one after Ulysses S. Grant, born 1822 in Ohio, served from 1877 until 1881. One of 7 presidents from Ohio, the middle one of 3 consecutive.
He's my ancestor, Rachel said. I'm from Ohio, too. But I got no interest in politics. Tell Mr. Brewer I work for a bank in San Antonio, and we just discovered stock in his grandfather's name worth about $1 million.
You'd be excited about that,
The maid said. She walked away, and Rachel stepped through the door in time to see her climbing a wide staircase at the back of the entrance foyer. She moved neatly, without apparent effort, one hand on the rail all the way. The foyer was the size of a basketball court, and it was hushed and cool, paneled in golden hardwood polished to a deep luster by generations of maids. There was a grandfather clock taller than Rachel, ticking softly to itself once a second. An antique chaise like you see society women perched on in oil-painted portraits. Rachel wondered if it would break in the middle if he put his weight on it. He pressed on the velvet with his hand, felt horsehair padding under it. Then the maid came back down the stairs the same way she'd gone out, gliding, her body perfectly still and her hand just grazing the rail.
he's seen now, she said. He's on the balcony at the back of the house.
There was an upstairs foyer with the same dimensions and the same decor. French doors led out onto the rear balcony, which ran the whole width of the house and looked out over acres of hot grassland. It was roofed, and fans turned lazily near the ceiling. There was heavy wicker furniture painted white and arranged in a group. A man sat in a chair with a small table at his right hand. The table held a pitcher and a glass filled with what looked like lemonade, but it could have been anything. The man was a bull-necked guy of about 60. He was softened and faded from a peak that might have been impressive 20 years ago. He had plenty of white hair and a red face burned into lines and crags by the sun. He was dressed all in white pants, white shirt, white shoes.